Welcome, everyone. Pleased to have you here with us today for episode 62 of This is CDR. We have a great audience and a very exciting presenter, so we're going to go ahead and get started. This is CDR is an online event series presented by OpenAir to contextualize carbon removal for policy that OpenAir is working on in the US as well as in national and subnational jurisdictions globally. My name's Toby Bryce. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York. I work on carbon removal policy advocacy and market development with OpenAir. And everyone, if you haven't already, and I see many of you have, please introduce yourself in the chat. I think everyone likes to hear who's here and where everyone's zooming in from. And be sure to direct your introduction to everyone and not just host and panelists so everyone can see it. Just some quick background on OpenAir. We're an all-volunteer network dedicated to advancing carbon removal. We are a global community. We work together on what we call missions, which are shared open source projects in the areas of research and development, messaging and communications, policy advocacy, and activist market development. Here's a slide that kind of illustrates many of the things that we're working on. Chris Neidl, OpenAir's co-founder, is running the chat. Thank you, Chris. And he's going to put a link in the chat to our Twitter, so you can follow us on Twitter, and also to our mission page where you can see the projects we're working on, and a link that you can fill out a form to join us. And we organize ourselves on a Discord server, and lots of great stuff to work on, and we'd love to have you be a part of what we're doing. As always, before we get started, we like to define our terms. This is a definition of carbon removal that is from the CDR primer, which is a great resource for learning about carbon removal. It's also essentially the same definition that the IPCC uses, most recently in their AR6 Working Group 3 report. But carbon removal is a purposeful human activity to remove CO2 from the atmosphere and durably store it in geological, terrestrial, or ocean reservoirs, or in long-lived products. So it's capture from the atmosphere plus storage. Two things to talk about when we talk about carbon removal. One thing that carbon removal is not is what is typically referred to in the media and elsewhere as carbon capture, quote unquote, which typically means capturing CO2 from a fossil carbon emission source like a cement plant or a natural gas power plant. Carbon capture, in this sense, point source carbon capture may or may not be a good climate solution, depending on the techno-economic, socio-economic, and other aspects of the situation. But one thing that it's clearly not is carbon removal. It's a form of emissions reductions. It does not remove CO2 from the atmosphere. Number two, when we talk about carbon removal, it's really critical to call out, disclaim, yell from the rooftops that carbon removal is in no way, shape, or form a substitute for reducing emissions. We need to reduce emissions and decarbonize our global economy as quickly and as completely as possible, full stop. If we don't do that, carbon removal won't matter because we will be in a very bad situation. That said, carbon removal will be required to give us any chance of limiting warming to 1.5 or even 2 degrees Celsius. There's clear scientific consensus that carbon removal will be required at gigaton scale. That's billions of tons per year by mid-century if we want to meet our climate goals. There are two reasons for this. Number one, we're not going to completely be able to eliminate our emissions in a climate relevant time frame. Certain sectors are hard to abate. The best example of this is agriculture and food systems, which are a third of global emissions and which we are not going to be able to decarbonize by mid-century. Number two, we already have 1 trillion plus tons of anthropogenic CO2 in the atmosphere, and we're going to need to start removing those in the second half of the century to restore our climate to a safer and healthier state, which we can see we're already veering away from. So carbon removal is essential. It's an essential climate solution alongside emissions reductions and adapting to our already changed climate, and we need to get started working on it today, which is why we're here. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Megha, who is going to talk a little bit about running the show and introduce today's exciting presenter.
Muted.
Oh, thank you. Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. I'm Megha. I am an OpenAir member in London, and I work on carbon removal policy as well. So as usual, quick housekeeping notes. So we're going to start with a short presentation, followed by a few prepared questions, and then moderated audience Q&A. So please type any questions you have into the Q&A box in Zoom. It's separate from the chat box, so make sure you find the one for Q&A. That helps us organize things a bit better. The event's being recorded, so we'll send the video link to everyone who registered, and we'll also post it to OpenAir's website and to the YouTube channel. This week, we're very pleased to welcome Robert Höglund, who will present the excellent and insightful CDR.fyi 2022 Year in Review report. which tells us a little bit about what we can hope and expect in 2023 and beyond to get to the long duration CDR market on track for gigaton scale by mid-century. CDR.fyi is a community-driven effort to bring transparency and accountability to the carbon removal market, and they work with CDR participants to ensure accurate, trusted reporting for their purchases, deliveries, and verifications. Robert is an independent advisor working with companies and organizations on carbon removal, as well as climate contributions and climate policy through his company, Marginal Carbon AB. He previously headed Oxfam Sweden's policy and communications team, where he authored the discussion paper, Removing Carbon Now. He founded the Climate Goal Initiative, which is a network of organizations pushing Sweden to adopt a consumption-based climate target. And Robert also created and manages the Milkywire Climate Transformation Fund, sits on the board of Mistra Sustainable Consumption, and was part of the Science Based Target Initiative's Net Zero Expert Advisory Group. So Robert, whenever you're ready, over to you.
Great. So let's see if my camera kicks in. Yeah, here we are. Well, I'm very glad to be here. I think the OpenAir Collective, this is CDR series. I think it's the best education anyone can get into CDR. It's really nothing comes close to it, and in terms of getting to know all different solutions, all different companies that are working in this space. So it's hugely insightful. So really happy to be part of it. So I'm going to present CDR.fyi, a market snapshot. We did a year in review report just at the end of the year. I'm going to show you some data from that. Megha already presented me, so I'm not going to say any more about that. Working on a lot of things in carbon removal. And CDR.fyi, as Megha said, is the largest open registry for high quality or durable CDR. And it gets in data across different registries from different places, trying to give such an accurate picture as possible of the carbon removal market, using public information, but also submissions from companies that might not publicize it anywhere else. They choose to register it on CDR.fyi. But it's not a complete picture of everything that's happening, but we do think we're capturing the majority of deals that are being made. And it does only track durable carbon removal, the carbon that is removed and stored for more than 100 years. And it does not track forestation, soil carbon, coastal blue carbon, such as mangroves, etc. One of the reasons that we don't do that is it would be orders of magnitude more difficult. There's many more carbon credits sold from these types of solutions, and it wouldn't be possible for us to track all of that. And we're also interested in tracking and giving information on this new CDR sector, which includes the different types of solutions that you see above the red line here. Different people have different definitions, but generally speaking, these are the types of solutions that we would track on CDR.fyi, such as biochar, enhanced weathering, direct air capture, mineralization. And our aim is to track 100% of retired carbon removal credits, but that is going to be published somewhere else most of the time. So on registries. So for example, Puro has an open registry where they publicize information of all the retired tons that have gone through Puro standard, and it's on the Puro registry. It's not all their pre-purchases, but all the tons that have been delivered. And then Carbon Future has another registry, and there are companies that has their own, such as Charm, and then actors like Vera and Gold Standard have registries, but they haven't started publicizing carbon removal tons there. But it would be a place where you can find all information on all retired tons. It's not that difficult because most of the information is public. But then we also want to capture the majority of pre-purchases and offtake agreements. So that is often secret information because the actors are choosing not to share it. But from our interviews and talking to different types of industry insiders, we do think that we're capturing a large majority of pre-purchase and offtake agreements. So we don't think that there's definitely a lot of deals that's happening that we don't know about, but we don't think it will be bigger than what we have on the platform. And just some definitions. So the biggest part of the deals that are tracked on the platform is for future tons, right? So it's pre-purchases where you pay upfront, or it's offtake agreement where you have a legally binding contract to buy these carbon removal tons in the future, and maybe if some conditions are met. Then we're also registering like letters of intents or options to buy carbon removal, but not putting it on the visible platform, because that would be sort of mixing apples and oranges, because that's not a certain deal. It's not certain that that carbon will be purchased in the future. And then deliveries, that's when the carbon is actually removed and stored. And doesn't necessarily mean that someone retired the credit on a registry, but the carbon is in the ground. And when we look at price, we look at the known selling prices, and many of the deals do not include a price. But then we look at the ones that have a price and average it out. And when we look at the total transaction volume, then we're doing some averages where we don't have prices, and then taking the average price to calculate with the number of tons bought to get the number for it all. And the reason to do this is because when I started a Google Sheet, it's just a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago, tracking all the known sales of carbon removal. And because I wanted to have the information and wanted to understand how things were going, how big is the sector actually, what's the trend, who are the big players. And there's a need for that kind of transparency and accountability as well, so people can follow it. And there's numerous different types of use cases that this can be used for. And then Kevin Niparko took the initiative to build a site on using this data, but also bringing in a lot more data through APIs, etc., and did a great job to automate that and run that with contributors, Chris Nixon, John Vogel, and Filippo Varini as well. And now we sort of work on this together as a side project, basically. It's a website, it's not a company, so far at least. And we did publish this year in review looking at 2022. How did this CDR market evolve? And if we start with purchases, which is the biggest category, then it looks like we have massive growth between 2021 and 2022, going from 93,000 tons sold to almost 600,000. So quite impressive growth, 533%. But 400,000 tons of that is from one deal. It's Airbus buying from Carbon Engineering at 1.5. So it sort of distorts the data a bit. If you take that out, then the growth rate is 106%, still a healthy growth rate, but not like an exploding growth rate. And of course, the majority of these tons were not delivered in 2022, but for subsequent years. And we do have, at the end of 2022, there were 75 unique CDR suppliers. So someone that sold more than 1 ton, but only 10 of those suppliers actually had sold more than 1,000 tons. And out of those, 8 were biochar. So even though there's a largish number of CDR companies that have been starting to sell tons, there's quite a few that have delivered any yet. And looking at the breakdown of purchases by method, and here we exclude this giant Airbus purchase because it would distort this graph too much. You can see that it's sort of distributed between solutions. Biochar takes a very big chunk, mineralization takes some as well. It's both like noise dark, but also things like olivine that's ground up and spread on land. Direct air capture takes quite a bit, and then solutions like biomass removal and some of the new solutions like macroalgae and then bio-oil as well, which dominates more on the delivery side. And then if we have a look at who's actually buying this carbon, then we could see that 115 buyers are on the platform. 86 of those bought in 2022, only 48 in 2021, and 9 in 2020. So that's quite a good growth in the number of companies that's buying. But if you look at how many that's buying a sort of substantial amount, more than 1,000 tons, then that's actually much smaller. There's only 23 companies that bought more than 1,000 tons of carbon removal, durable carbon removal, which is very low. And in 2022, it was just 16 companies that bought more than 1,000 tons that we know of. And if you look at the composition of the buyers, you could see that they are mostly tech companies or in finance, with this one very notable exception of Airbus that doesn't fit in with those others, but they also have a good reason to go and buy carbon removal. And shifting over to the deliveries, we could see that it also has a good and healthy growth. We're going from 7,000 tons to 16 to 37,000 tons in 2022. So a growth rate of 130%. And we could see that it's definitely dominated by biochar and bio-oil. The delivered tons comes from there. And the top 10 suppliers that have, if you rank them on deliveries, are mostly biochar company. We have Green Sand registering that they have deliveries, and we have Charm doing bio-oil as well. But it's mainly biochar. It's not very surprising because they don't need long lead times. There's many biochar producers that already have machines. They could start selling carbon removal tons from their operation quite easily. They have access to feedstock. And even if they expand their operation, it's not something that takes many years. It doesn't take a lot of R&D, etc. So they were more shovel ready. And I do think we're going to see this kind of development continue for at least a few years before these large direct air capture facilities and others are built. Another interesting data point related to this is time to order fulfillment, where you can see that biochar is quick. It's 5 months on average for the orders that we have data on. And for the other types of deliveries, then it's projected delivery date, right? So when there is a date in the contract. And here, for example, Stripe's contracts that are public information also have a contract date, so you can see how long it's expected to take before delivery. But this also reflects how early the sector is and the type of behavior that the buyer has. The early buyers of carbon removal are trying to kickstart the market, trying to get new solutions off the ground. In a way, it's like buying prototypes, giving early R&D support. And then this is what is to be expected. It's not mature companies that already have a factory and can start shipping. And that's not sort of the reason why you're buying either. It's to get these new solutions off the ground and into the playing field. And then there's a bunch of actors that are tracked on the platform as well. Call them marketplaces here. Not all of them are technically marketplaces, but there's some kind of intermediary. And there's 41 of them that had played a role in a transaction one way or another. And Puro, which is they're a registry, but it was also, you were also able to purchase through Puro, at least earlier. So taking the lead. And I think Carbon Future added 50,000 tons early this year. So they've sprung ahead here. And then we have companies like Watershed that does emission measuring for their customers, but also have a carbon removal marketplace. Players like Supercritical that sell carbon removal. And then Milkywire, which I work with, this Climate Transformation Fund, don't resell carbon removal, but companies donate to this fund, and we make pre-purchases of carbon removal as a part of the fund's ambition to help reach global net zero. It's a charitable fund. And then others that we don't have all the data on, but we have some public information. So many of these probably have larger purchases through them. And something that a lot of people ask about is, of course, the price of the different methods. You can see with the data that we have that there's quite wide ranges, but we have an average price, of course, of each method, with biochar stabilizing around $180 per ton. The direct air capture and the electrochemical ocean CO2 capture it's much more expensive, but that really reflects what we already talked about, that you're buying these R&D tons, helping new solutions get kicked off, and you're paying for a company's development and their prototypes. So doesn't mean that there's a market for these tons at this price. It's just that someone agreed to buy the prototypes essentially at this cost, and everyone expects the prices to rapidly fall. So I heard a lot of people saying that, well, DAC actually cost $1,000. We're just going to sell our tons for $500, and then we can make a killing on the market because it's half as expensive. But then you have misunderstood what's going on. That is not the dynamics that we're going to see. And here's a graph that I didn't create, or it's actually, I didn't create any of the graphs. It's Kevin that done them, but an external person at Climate Stack who took the data and did an interesting graph where you see the number on the bottom axis of trades, and then the price on the left axis, and you can see sort of the convergence. You have lots of purchases around $150, $80 for Biochar. You have lots of purchases at $1,000 for DAC, which is mostly Climeworks, and then it's really spread out as well for different solutions. And you could see that there are outliers. There's a Biochar that's been sold for $550. There's direct DAC capture that's been over $2,500, and just for a few $100s as well. And then how much is actually being removed in total then? And I wanted to show this graph from the State of CDR report because it's quite different from what we're showing. So our estimate was that it's just 36,000 tons that was delivered in 2022, right? And here, this shows that it's 2 million tons, and novel CDR being so yeah, novel CDR being a bit over 2 million tons and 2 gigatons in total. So forestation, it's 2 gigatons. It's anthropogenic forestation that doesn't happen on nature's own terms, that someone actually wanting trees. It's just about 1% of, or less than 1% of those forestation tons that it's sold on carbon markets. So most of that it's not traded as carbon credits. But if you look at the novel CDR, which is essentially durable CDR, then this is a lot more than we track. But the main difference is that CDR.fyi is tracking sales of carbon credits or carbon removal tons. So for example, the BECCS products here, I'm not aware of any BECCS products that sold carbon removal tons, at least not openly, and in the last few years, even though they have been removing carbon and storing it underground. And the same for Biochar. There's more Biochar production going on than people selling carbon removal tons from that. So that is part of the difference. And then this is also gross removals. So it doesn't take into account life cycle emissions. And many of these BECCS projects don't claim net negative emissions actually, because they're part of ethanol plants that have large emissions elsewhere, etc. And then taking a step back and also looking at the voluntary carbon market, which carbon removal is a part of, then you could see that it's been growing quite a bit, but it's still small. 500 million tons of carbon credits, which this 36,000 tons this is a tiny bit of course. And how much will it grow in the future? There's lots of different estimates going on. A widely cited one was between 1.5 and 2 gigatons of carbon credits by 2030 on the voluntary carbon market. How much of that could be durable carbon removal? Like, who knows? There are some estimates in the State of CDR report that looked at projected capacity of things that are being planned to be built. And there is some data points showing that a majority of companies expect to have mostly carbon removal credits in their portfolio. They're buying credits. So I would guess that it's between 30 and 100 million tons per year being durably removed by 2030, but that could be off by a wide margin. But what we could see definitely is when we're starting small, there's a lot of room for growth. So CDR is tiny. The voluntary carbon market is pretty small too. Carbon compliance market is much bigger. Philanthropic giving is many times bigger. And then we have the oil and gas industry, 6,000 billion tons. So there definitely is a lot of growth potential. And looking at all of this, it stands clear that we don't really have a real CDR market right now. It's more a proto market. We have a number of actors that are attempting to kickstart carbon removal. They're trying to help get this off the ground and create a market. But we still have these kind of upside down dynamics where we have more marketplaces than suppliers that are delivering carbon today, and even fewer big buyers. So it's more buyers in numerous, if you count all of them, but if you just count the big ones, that they're fewer. So 41 marketplaces, 10 suppliers that removed over 1,000 tons, and 16 purchases more than 1,000 tons in 2022. And that is of course really upside down. And we do need a lot more companies to go in and start buying carbon removal. So all companies that plan to use removals as part of reaching their net zero targets or for other reasons, they need to start buying carbon removal today and spend a portion of their climate budgets on it. Otherwise, it risks not being available at all. So we are in a stage where carbon removal got a lot of attention, some very prolific new buyers, and some big initiatives like Frontier that is going to make a huge difference, a lot of policy development, but we're not really seeing the buyers pick up here and grow as fast as we would like. And there is a huge risk that there's going to be a lot of carbon removal companies without buyers, and they might not have the kind of VC funding to last through that valley of death phase. So I'm a little bit concerned, and I do think we need to convince more companies to go out and at least spend a small part of their budgets on kickstarting carbon removal. And one of the ways to do that is get standard setters like the Science Based Target Initiative to incentivize this, and other trendsetters that are making recommendations to maybe get companies to set interim targets or give clear recommendations that a portion should be spent on CDR now. And another obstacle is that we need to get MRV sorted. These early buyers are fine without standards, without registries, without measurement, reporting, and verification. But sort of the early majority, and definitely sort of the wide majority of buyers, are going to want to have that. So in order for this market to become a market, we need to get that in place. And a lot of people are working on it. So I'm hopeful that will be solved. All right, so I mean, there's so much we can say about this, but yeah, I need to keep it short, so I'm stopping there.
Fantastic. Robert, thank you so much for that, and thank you for being with us. Also, I just want to point out to everyone that it is midnight where Robert lives in Asia, and so we're especially appreciative for him taking his evening to join us. We always like to start with just a quick question about your sort of personal journey to CDR. Can you maybe share how you got interested in CDR and how you started working on it from where you were before? Yeah,
so I used to work in the NGO sector. I started out with communications and then policy, worked on consumption-based emissions quite a lot since 2015, getting Sweden to adopt a new target to reduce consumption-based emissions. Hopefully this will pass now, like 8 years later. And then sort of working on that and on climate, but was generally interested in carbon removal when it started getting talked about after the IPCC report, etc. And then in early 2020, I wanted to get answers to my questions about, does it make sense to start buying this now? Should Oxfam do that I worked for at the time? And it resulted in this paper, Removing Carbon Now, trying to dig into the questions about what should you think about, what are considerations if you want to start supporting carbon removal. So that was my initial question, and sort of starting with that paper, and then seeing that this is a new field where I can actually go in and start working on a lot of questions that people haven't solved yet. And it's quite a small field, so there's not a lot of people that take this kind of bird's eye view that I take and analyze it from different places. So I just felt I could have a bigger marginal impact working on carbon removal, and it's also really exciting. It's like it's a Klondike for people who like to have interesting problems to solve. So I'm happy to be working here in this early stage of the sector.
That's a great answer. And as Peter Reinhardt from Charm says, in a new sector like carbon removal, the distance to the frontier is very short. So it is a place where you can learn and get up to speed and find a place to have impact. Great example. But back to your kind of the last slide, ultimately to get to gigaton scale, we need the public sector to get involved in supporting carbon removal, which is something OpenAir is really focused on trying to help to happen. But in the immediate term, we need more voluntary buyers. And you had a recent blog post that maybe Chris can put in the chat that identified 4 obstacles that you alluded to these in the end of your slides just now: fear, lack of incentives, challenge, the difficulty of buying carbon removal, and price. Anything further you'd want to comment on that or elaborate? Like, which one of those do you think is the biggest obstacle, or do you think it's kind of a combination of factors?
I think yeah, they're all combination. I think lack of incentive is really important right now. A company doesn't risk anything if you just wait and say, yeah, maybe we'll need carbon removal by 2040 or 2050 when we have a net zero target date, but there's no reason for us to buy it now. No one is going to thank us. Maybe we'll even get shit for it in the future. So here fear comes in. Maybe it turns out that the solution that we're supporting was a bad one or something. So I think that those two things, fear of not doing the right thing, they see how companies are getting bashed for buying carbon credits that some said was the right thing to do a few years back, but now they're getting media attention in a negative way from that. So definitely those kind of things, and yeah, incentives and fear. Then of course price comes in, but that can be solved if you don't want to buy all of your offset all your emissions right now. If you just buy a part of it, then you solve the price question.
Yeah. That's great. And then this is a related question. Just want to highlight another thing that you worked on recently and published with a friend of OpenAir, Eli Mitchell-Larsen, about bridging the ambition gap. I think it's a really interesting way to look at the universe of voluntary buyers. We'll put a link to that in the chat as well, and I encourage everyone to read it, but maybe could you recap what that sort of central argument is there?
So that paper looks at who should be buying carbon removal, essentially, but also talking about other types of climate solutions. And we did an analysis looking at the 230, well, we started with 230, and then as a subset of those, that companies that have published their emissions. So the biggest company in the world, looking at Forbes, it's like a Forbes 2000, yeah, it's like, exactly, yeah, Forbes or Fortune, but yeah, a list of the biggest company in the world, and then looking at their emissions and their profits and the revenue, and then looking at what is their profit per ton that they're emitting, and looking at the different sectors. And you could see that there are a lot of companies that have huge profits per ton that they emit, even if you look in scope 3, so over $100,000 per ton, and there are big companies over $10,000 is very, very common. And those are, financial, insurance, software, like companies that don't manufacture things. And then the big emitters have very small profits per ton that they emit. So if you're looking for someone that should sort of pick up the bill and pay for carbon removal, the ones that can afford to take responsibility for their emissions today, they are the ones with the sort of lowest emissions. And that doesn't mean that the high emitters should be free from responsibility, but they also have huge needs to invest internally. So they probably need to use all their profits to shift their business model anyway. Whereas the low emitters could use a portion of their profits to start buying carbon removal, and it wouldn't be a big dent in their finances. So we're pushing for saying that these rich companies, they should be incentivized. They should be told that you can afford it, so you should take responsibility. You should pay the full cost of your emissions. And a way of doing that is by implementing an internal carbon fee and using that money to support climate solutions. It could be carbon removal, it could also be other things.
And I think a number of the early voluntary buyers exemplify that sort of high end of the scale, Stripe and Shopify and Swiss Re, who are really doing it extremely profitable. And what are some examples of companies that are maybe in the middle of that chart or that scatter plot, and then at the low end of profitability, for whom this might be more challenging?
Yeah, in the middle will be companies that do some physical things, like in retail, for example, in media as well, so consumer electronics, etc. So these type of companies that have mid-sized profits per ton that they emit, and they are working on the maybe average CO2 intensity. And then the high emitters are chemical companies, mining companies, utilities for sure, at least in countries outside of Sweden, where I'm from, where carbon is very low from an electricity sector, and then oil and gas companies, of course.
Yeah, got it. Very helpful. Again, it's a great report, and the link's in the chat, and I would encourage people who are interested to take a look at it. Another thing that you've written recently, it was a post that you wrote a while back ago called "Carbon Can Be Temporarily Stored for a Long Time," and then you actually re-upped sort of follow-up this morning, which was really excellent, and Chris can put a link to that in the chat too, hopefully, but focused on durability and sort of the equivalence between temporary and quote-unquote permanent storage of carbon. lot of questions about this in the chat, so we'll probably touch on this issue in the audience Q&A. But do you want to maybe recap kind of where you came out in terms of your thinking there, and just any general thoughts on that issue as it relates to procurement of carbon removal?
Yeah. So that blog post tries to, or that article tries to look at, can you equate different types of carbon removal and storage with each other? So would it be okay to buy three trees instead of one rock, as Andrew Lockley, who helped out with the text, said? And it is a difficult question, but the bottom line is that if you do temporary storage instead of permanent, then you will have higher temperatures in the future. And since CO2 lasts for a very, very long time, there's no amount of temporary carbon you can buy to offset that unless preconditions apply. So if you replace the temporary carbon in the future, you discount future harm, or adaptation leads to a certain level of warming being less harmful. So the post goes through all these things. It's far too detailed, I think, to discuss here, but bottom line, my conclusion is that temporary, very short carbon removal can have value if you replace it, but then you probably need to put money aside today and not just sort of promise it in the future. You need to create some kind of legal trust or a foundation of some way so you actually can replace it in the future. But if you're using centurial carbon storage, so hundreds of years, then you sort of could use what's called vertical stacking to equate it to permanent storage. So if you have biochar or maybe even macroalgae that sinks to the bottom of the sea and it lasts for 800 years, that could, with reasonable assumptions on some type of discounting of the future, even if it's just because of uncertainty, because we don't know if humanity even will be around, and also some assumptions on how adaptation might develop, it is reasonable to say that this kind of hundreds of years storage can be made equal to permanent.
I don't think we have time for all the math here, but I just want to highlight the importance of the discount rate in these calculations. There have been some defenses of quote unquote ton-year accounting put out there by practitioners of ton-year accounting that have a discount rate that makes it look very easy to make this work. But I think your paper argues that you need a pretty significantly more conservative discount rate to this in a valid way.
And also take into account that the harm from warming is non-linear. So like it's much worse to go from 2 to 3 degrees than it is to go from 1 to 2 degrees. And if you're just storing carbon for a few years, as some of these ton-year accounting companies are doing, then you're offsetting a very, very small amount of harm today. And even if you multiply that with many tons, that's still a small number. And you're also not helping to keep peak temperatures down, and you're not helping to reach global climate targets. So if you have this temporary, short-term, decades or years carbon storage, then it is re-released before peak temperatures is reached, and then you definitely have to replace it because there's a lot of tipping points and tail risks that comes with warming. So we want to keep the peak down, and if you're not helping to keep the peak down, then I don't think you could sort of be equating yourself to permanent storage.
Well said. Lots of audience questions, so I want to hand it over to Megha, but one last question from me. You're in the middle of a procurement cycle for Milkywire, and we'll put a link to that description of that program in the chat, which is a really great program, and you've procured some really interesting projects in your previous cycles. Without asking you to pick a favorite child or favorite children, you do have kind of a privileged view of what the latest greatest is out there of CDR projects, and also without betraying any confidences. But can you talk to the audience? We all love biochar and enhanced rock weathering. Some of us love direct air capture. Can you talk about maybe some exciting new things that you've seen that maybe everyone's not aware of, kind of in general terms, like pathway or approach terms, that we should maybe point people to learn more about?
So we got 240 applications for on different CDR solutions. In total, and 150 of them was from CDR solutions, and I think like 80 or 90% of those applications were good. So like it makes it difficult for us to choose. I haven't counted, but I think definitely the majority of them haven't sold any tons yet. So there's a lot of companies working out there, and that's also why we need more buyers. I would say that there's lots of good biochar companies that are doing a great job, a lot of good enhanced weathering that's preparing to do that. But a lot of the technical innovation, it comes more on direct air capture side, either like ocean electrochemical CO2 capture or from ambient air. And there's lots of super exciting approaches that are just going to radically cut energy consumption, sort of using passive approaches, using waste heat, using intermittent energy. So I'm pretty hopeful that we'll see solutions that go well beyond below $100 per ton. And then there's some outliers of sort of using new types of solutions like cold plasma, etc. That's I'm not sure if it's going to be viable or not, but there are also wild cards. So we need to keep looking. We shouldn't be happy with the set of solutions that we have today. Should definitely have an open mind. And yeah, I think it's Ryan Orbucks that said that we probably don't know which carbon removal solution it is what will be used in the future. It's probably something no one thought about yet. That's going to be the sort of the killer in 2100.
Yeah. Anything outside of DAC that maybe synthetic biology or other approaches that are really novel outside of DAC that you are excited about?
So we're not giving R&D grants so far, so we're not getting the earliest of the earliest. We are getting those that have maybe at least TRL 3 or so. So many of the sort of crazy new approaches we're not seeing. There are interesting combinations because we also support decarbonization. So some companies creating fertilizer and also doing carbon removal at the same time. Yeah, a lot of new innovation in biomass burial. But yeah, generally it's in the DAC or ocean DAC side that I see most innovation right now.
Got it. Cool. Thank you very much. I could ask you questions all day, as I often say, but we have a bunch of audience questions, and Megha's going to come on now to start asking you some of those. Megha?
Hey, yes, we do have quite a lot. Maybe I'll start first with just one about CDR.fyi itself. So, it's quite a new market. There's different types of CDR you're covering. How do you think about kind of collecting all of that data from different sources, reconciling it, making sure it all makes sense? And then how do you think about that as this scales and grows up and, there's presumably going to be much more data you have to contend with?
Yeah, so far it's been working all right. And a lot of it comes through APIs. But at some point we need to scale it. Now it's a project on the side. So, maybe turn it into something bigger and have people working more hours with it. But at the growth rate that the market has now, it is definitely manageable. At some point it probably won't, hopefully not.
Okay, got it. And is it something that you plan to start monetizing the data, or how do you think about growing the platform on the financial side?
I definitely don't think we're going to lock the data in, at least. So if there was to be some kind of monetization, it would be through other channels. Yeah.
Okay, cool. You talked a little bit about the MRV side of things. Where do you see the biggest challenges on MRV, either based on which technology or anything else? What are the kind of biggest issues there?
I think even those that are simple to solve, such as DAC and geological storage, they just don't have any agreed upon standard and no one where they put the tons in a registry or something. And a lot of buyers just want to have that. They want to have the stamp of approval from a big actor. So there's no technical difficulties and there's not a lot of discussion points even. It just hasn't been done yet, or there's people working on it and have been working on it for quite some time. We're not there yet, and I think they're keeping some buyers away. But for some solutions, MRV is very, very difficult. So ocean CDR is extremely difficult because you can't directly measure a lot of stuff. You have to rely on models. But there are a lot of both scientists and startups that are doing exciting work there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like most of us would agree that the MRV side of things and accurate reporting is important, but how where in the value chain do you see that playing in and facilitating the market? So is it buyers looking for it, or is it just registries being able to operate more efficiently?
I think it is keeping the market down now. So that is, I think, something that everyone knows. And if you look at all of these carbon removal suppliers, they're basically doing it themselves. So they're creating their own standards. They're bringing in third parties often to verify their own standards, or they go with Puro or Carbon Future. For example, if it's Biochar, Puro has several other standards. So almost everyone is sort of working on it. It's not that it's a forgotten field or anything. It's just that it takes more work, and we're not quite there yet.
Okay, got it. I think you also mentioned something about lack of buyers being an issue. So someone just wanted to clarify that you think there's an issue as there's a surplus of supply, or is it something else you were?
No, I think we're demand constrained. I don't think we're supply constrained, not for free purchases. Yes, for like tons removed in 2023, or like tons that are already in the ground at a reasonable price, sort of, those are supply constrained. But you can go ahead and you know, buy 1 million tons of carbon removal tomorrow if you can accept delivery in like 5-6 years or something, no problem. Like it's absolutely like, so it is demand constraint, and those kind of contracts and offtake agreements are also needed for facilities to be built. So now from my point of view, it's definitely the demand side that's a constraint, even though a lot of people will say the opposite.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you talked a little bit about, you know, how most people making purchases today are thinking of it as an investment into the R&D and helping build prototypes rather than actually buying it. And I think you also mentioned that most of these are, you know, that's the main reason people are doing it. Do you have a sense of how many buyers out there are actually doing it for any other reason, like offsetting or, you know, CSR goals, or is it truly people like Frontier who just want to make the market move forward?
It's CSR goals, as I think is part of the story you tell when you also say you kickstart the market and you sort of help get this. It's just that you don't care too much about how many tons you're getting, but you're getting a lot of PR value and all that. So I think all companies that have purchased are getting there are not necessarily that everyone is making a lot of PR around it, but most of them I think are getting some goodwill or have been able to have some coverage around that, sort of reaping those benefits. There are a few maybe that are making neutrality claims on the basis of buying this durable carbon removal, but I don't think there are that many. Those who are making neutrality claims are mostly buying traditional carbon credits, also because it's so expensive to offset your entire footprint, and you know, 36,000 tons is not even enough for one big company. You know, it's far too less, because you also need to have delivered ton if you're going to make a claim. You can't make a claim for tons that you're going to get delivered in 2026. Then you have to wait until 2026. So it might be that some companies are planning to use the tons at that stage, and I guess some of them also want to have like a stream, sort of relationships and a stream of credits coming their way later on. We saw a big streaming agreement being signed on the Biochar market just this week, where you get credits over a longer period of time, and then they'll probably be resold or used for this kind of purposes.
Yeah, and can you talk a little bit about, like, at what stage do you think that will get to a scale when companies are genuinely offsetting, you know, a significant portion of their emissions through these things, both on the market side, on the policy being in place to maybe, you know, encourage them to do that, supply being available, kind of everything coming together?
It's really hard to tell. I think it can change quite quickly. So maybe buyers are losing trust in the traditional carbon market, seeing that doesn't really work with all the coverage that's been on that. And if that trust goes to the bottom at the same time, you have credible actors saying that you should be buying carbon removal, then it might shift to that. I mean, it of course is a little bit dangerous because the avoided emissions are much more important than carbon removal. So ideally we should be financing avoided emissions first. It's just that it's really difficult to finance avoided emissions in an effective way, which carbon markets are showing now. So then carbon removal becomes the option. But I think it's also very important to differentiate between, you shouldn't be trying to offset all your emissions right now. It's not a good strategy. Carbon removal will be part of your net zero target later down the road, but you also have to start investing in it now. So I think those are several sort of thoughts to keep in the head at the same time. yeah, I don't dare to guess how fast it will go. I gave this estimate of 30 to 100 million tons by 2030. So that's a guess at least.
Yeah, okay, got it. Specifically in the US, do you have a sense of how the Inflation Reduction Act is going to impact CDR efforts, short-term and long-term? I think it's had quite a few changes in terms of like the tax equity structure for that.
Yeah, we could definitely see the effects straight away, because there were some really big players that went out and said, now we're building 5 million tons of DAC by 2030. There was two different companies that went out and said things like that, and definitely fueled by this 45Q and the IRA, and also that they can sell the tons to buyers and get this money from the government. And I do think we're going to see quite a lot of European companies go to the US as well, because it's going to take longer time for the EU to create anything like that. So yeah, the US already was the dominating part of the CDR world. If you look at X price applicants, for example, heavily dominated by the US, and I think it's going to become more heavily dominated, at least in the short term. And then what happens with this kind of political initiatives in the future, they might change, right? So that's hard to tell.
Yeah, I guess it sounds like that was a big inflection point for the US. Someone else also asked if Frontier kind of making these announcements also spurred others to,
100%.
make bigger commitments. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Stripe and Shopify, I think their influence and what they did for the CDR market, it really, I mean, you can't overstate it. They've been massively impactful. It really created this new proto market where there was none before. I think we would be in a very different place if it weren't for them.
Got it. Okay. Someone also asked whether you see a shift away from nature-based solutions happening, and I guess both the the 45Q stuff in the IRA and the Frontier precedents kind of point to that. Is that the way you expect it to develop?
No, I don't think so. If you look wider, so within the carbon removal ecosystem, which is quite small, a few thousand people working on CDR, I think, yeah, nature-based solutions are not that popular, and talking about the permanence difference. But if you look at the economy at wide, it's still forestation. It's there you actually have your supply constraint right now, because you don't. Well, it's the same thing there. You can always go and buy a future forest, but it's a lot of companies that want to go and invest in reforestation and good projects, and they have a hard time finding good projects. So I don't think that sentiment is really that strong. Maybe avoid the deforestation with the latest headlines that it is losing. But then you have new initiatives there as well, such as the LEAF coalition, where you have jurisdictional credits. So it's on a whole country scale, which solves some problems.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, just thinking on the demand side, can you just talk a little bit about the role of the voluntary carbon markets versus compliance markets, and how you think that's going to drive, quality scaled CDR over time?
I definitely think that governments are going to be absolutely take the lion's share of carbon removal, either directly through procurement or indirectly through creating rules that makes companies have to buy it. But I think it may be even more likely that it's through procurements or other direct support. The voluntary carbon market has a really important role to play, especially now and in the early days, because you're getting these new solutions kickstarted. Governments are a bit slower often. Like, for example, the 45Q only includes geological storage of CO2, so it doesn't include enhanced weathering, doesn't include mineralization or ocean capture, etc. But the voluntary carbon market can provide funds for these type of companies and sort of get them tried out and de-risked for government support. So I think that's a really important role it will play, even if it maybe will just be like, I don't know, 10-20% or something, or maybe less of the total volume.
Got it. Okay, I'm just going to do a couple more before we have to go. So you mentioned some streaming deals. Someone wanted to know, broadly, what kind of terms are you seeing on the streaming deals and discounts for advanced purchases? And is there anywhere where there's some sample contracts or terms that people can look at?
So I don't have any contracts or anything. I mean, only the public information. I do suspect that streaming deals have a very different price point than an offtake agreement or pre-purchase. It's a a different type of financing where you give cash up front and you take some risk as the people that give the cash, but you get a lot better price on the credits in the future for sure. And definitely you would have different price points between if you're paying everything now or if you just promise to pay in the future, because if you pay everything now, you do have give the company money to do things. So but there's a lot of innovation to be done in this field, I think, on how these early companies can get money now at the same time as the buyers are not taking extraordinary risk. So for the early buyers, maybe it was fine for small volumes, but if it's big volumes, then it becomes a different thing.
Okay, just one more before we go. In general, what kind of developments are you hoping to see in 2023? Policy, financing, technology, kind of anything related to CDR?
Well, yeah, more of everything. I hope to see some developments in the EU and that they're not compromising on quality of carbon removal. So definitely hoping that picks up. Hoping to see a lot of new interesting companies with completely novel ideas. I've been pleasantly surprised by, I've been also part of this CDR accelerator in Europe, which ETH Zurich, and sort of seeing the different cohorts being better and better every time. There are more and more hard tech solutions. So we definitely see a lot of growth of companies doing the work, and I hope to see more of that. And then, yeah, more buyers for sure. These rich companies that have a lot of profits per ton, they should start buying carbon removal. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been great. And Toby, I'll give it back to you to finish up.
Thank you. Great job with the questions, Megha. Thank you, audience. Those were really great questions, and I'm sorry we couldn't get to them all, but we have to be respectful of Robert's sleep schedule and let him go at the top of the hour. But Robert, that was amazing. Thank you so much for being with us.
Can I stay and check the Q&A and chat?
Yeah, get in there, mix it up. We'll leave it open for a few minutes if Robert's up for it, and he can answer in the Q&A. We are going to go ahead and close the program just so that people can get on with their day. We have a couple of programming notes to share, but yeah, Robert, if you want to go ahead and just answer directly in the Q&A, that would be fantastic. Appreciate it. All right, let's see what we got here. Okay, so hopefully Chris is still there. Chris, can you put a link to tomorrow's event in the chat? We have a really cool advocacy event tomorrow. Chris Neidl will be moderating, and we have all of the participants who helped the Low Embodied Concrete Leadership Act become law in New Jersey, which happened last week, which is very exciting. And I just want to give again a special shout out to Sue Dorward and Sean Moen, who are OpenAir advocates who have been working on this for 2 years, and their work has been amazing and really admirable. And now this is the law, and it's a great bill. So you can learn more about it tomorrow by registering for that link below. Another cool thing happening with OpenAir is we have the Massachusetts, our state level CDR procurement policy, which gets governments in a very small way starting to buy CDR, just like Frontier, Shopify, et cetera do. Is a live bill in New York. It is sponsored by the Senate Majority Leader in New York. We think it has really interesting prospects. Hopefully Chris can put those links in the chat. We have a sample email that you can write to your state rep in Massachusetts to get them to support the bill. And if you're interested in helping us, we need all sorts of advocacy work to try to advance the legislation. So please check out OpenAir and join us to help us get this bill passed. And we have a couple other exciting state level measures that are coming in Colorado and California and potentially some other states. So lots to do at the state level here in the US. Finally, next week, very excited to welcome Dr. Grishma Gadikota, who is an amazing engineering professor at Cornell University here in New York. She has a novel new direct air capture with storage company called Carbon to Stone that does atmospheric direct air capture and then mineralizes the CO2 in industrial waste. It's super interesting. It's self-contained. It doesn't require geologic storage. And I think it's really promising. So please register for that in the chat. And we will be posting the upcoming other This Is CDR soon. We have a really exciting schedule all the way into the spring that we're in the process of booking. But thank you again to all for being with us. Thanks especially to Robert for such a insightful presentation, and also for all his more general contributions to the CDR sector. And we will everyone have a good week, and we'll see you next week.